Gracie Whitman lived with her mother in an old weather-beaten trailer on the edge of Brookdale, Texas, a place known for little else but dry winds, dusty roads, and fences, leaning tiredly under the southern sun. Every morning, while other kids were still buried under warm blankets, Gracie was already up at 5 a.m., joining her mother Helen to clean the small bakery at the corner of Main Street, where the two had been working since last year. The bakery didn't belong to them, but every time Gracie wiped the foggy glass windows or rearranged the tray of cheap muffins, she did it with the care of someone protecting the last safe place in a harsh world. Helen Whitman, Gracie's mother, was a petite woman with dark hair tied neatly behind her head, her eyes always carrying a weary but deeply loving gaze. Once, when she noticed Gracie secretly peeking through the bakery window at the brightly lit dance class across the street, she simply smiled and said, "You don't have to be rich to live kindly, Gracie. Just keep walking with your heart and it'll take you where you need to go." Gracie didn't have many friends. Her old worn-out uniform had been stitched back together. More than once her shoes were frayed, and the way she always sat quietly in the back of the class made her an easy target for teasing. But what others didn't know was this: behind those silent brown eyes was a world full of sound. Gracie often sang silently in her mind, melancholy ballads, lullabies her mother used to sing when she had a fever and no money for a doctor. Before we continue Gracie's inspiring journey, if you also believe that a person's true worth lies not in their appearance or background, but in their perseverance and unwavering passion, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can share more heart-touching stories with the world. And now, let's return to the story where more unexpected moments are still waiting just ahead. One Monday morning in the middle of the classroom, buzz, the crackly intercom blared from the principal's office. "Welcome to Talent Week. If you'd like to sign up to perform, please register outside the office before Wednesday." The kids erupted into chatter. One said she'd do a TikTok routine, another boasted about playing the electric drums. Only Gracie stayed quiet, clutching the frayed strap of her backpack. But that evening, after finishing the pile of dirty dishes at the bakery, she quietly opened the old cassette player her mother had kept like a treasure. The warped tape released trembling, faded notes her mother's voice recorded years ago when Gracie was still in her crib. Helen sat down on the bed, wiping her hands on her apron, listening in silence. Gracie softly said, "I want to sing that song, Mom. Scarboro Fair, the one you used to sing when I had a fever." Helen froze. Then she smiled, a smile like a small lamp flickering on in a dark room. "You know," she said, "I once dreamed of being on stage. But then your grandma got sick and I quit school to take care of her. I've never regretted it. But if I got to see you up there, that would be the greatest gift of my life." The next morning, Gracie stood in front of the sign-up sheet outside the school office. The list was already long filled with the names of popular students. She hesitated, her hand trembling, and then wrote on the very last line, "Gracie Whitman, singing Scarboro Fair." Less than 10 minutes later, giggles echoed down the hallway. Gracie signed up to sing. Is she going to use a rice cooker as a microphone? Please, let this be the comedy act. Gracie heard it all. But instead of crying, she just lowered her head and walked on, clutching the little notebook where she'd copied the song lyrics in her slanted handwriting. That night, Helen opened the bedroom door to find her daughter standing in the middle of the small room, singing each line, her voice trembling but clear as morning mist. She didn't say a word, only quietly sat down beside her. Outside, the world remained unchanged. The rich still got the applause and the poor still got laughed at. But inside that room, a voice was rising, soft but determined, like a tiny seed, pushing through dry, cracked soil, reaching for the light. That Friday morning, the schoolyard at Brookdale Elementary looked brighter than usual. Strings of small red, blue, and yellow flags fluttered in the breeze. A makeshift stage had been set up in the auditorium, framed by a faded burgundy velvet curtain. On the LED screen behind the stage, a bold message glowed, "Talent Week. Let your light shine." Gracie arrived early. She wore the only white dress in her closet, a simple one, slightly tight at the shoulders. but still intact thanks to her mother's careful hands. Her brown hair was neatly braided into two small plaits, and she clutched her little notebook, the one where she had written and rewritten the lyrics until the ink had smudged. Her mother, Helen, walked beside her, though she had just finished the night shift at the bakery, and her eyes were dark from lack of sleep. She looked neat, her hair tied in a bun, and her gaze could not hide her pride. She held her daughter's hand tightly. "I'm here, Gracie. You're not alone." The performances began. A group of students danced hip-hop under flashing lights. A boy played electronic drums. A blonde girl sang pop through a wireless mic. Each act ended with loud applause from their friends in the audience. Gracie sat alone at the edge of the waiting area, quietly observing. A few kids glanced at her, then covered their mouths and laughed. Whispering could be heard, "The fairy tale girl's up next." "Heard there's no backing track, guess we're getting a poetry reading gone wrong." The MC, a young teacher in a floral dress, walked on stage with a strained smile. And finally, a performance with no background music, no props. A very special performance. Please welcome Gracie Whitman singing Scarboro Fair. A few scattered claps. Several phones were raised ready to record a funny moment. One student even had humorous stickers queued up to slap on the video later. Gracie stepped onto the stage. The spotlight cast everything below into a blur. She couldn't see anyone, only felt her legs trembling, her hands cold and the thin notebook damp with sweat. But in her mind, she knew exactly where her mother was, third row on the left near the window. Just knowing that was true, she could sing. She took a deep breath. "Are you going to Scarboro Fair?" Her voice floated out soft as a breath, yet there was something in it that made the entire room pause. No music, no lighting effects, just a girl standing alone singing with a bare, unguarded heart. At first there were small giggles, a few impatient glances. But then, nothing. A strange silence fell over the auditorium. Not the silence of boredom, but the kind that happens when something real touches you. The music teacher, who had been jotting notes, stopped her pen. A gray-haired parent, with golden-rimmed glasses, slowly removed them and wiped his eyes. Gracie's song was like mist, delicate but soaked with feeling, slipping through every crack, every corner, every heart that had been closed for too long. There was no technique, no perfection, only honest notes that reached deep into the listeners' souls. When the final note faded, no one clapped. Not because they didn't like it, but because in that moment, they forgot what to do. As if everyone had just passed through a light rain inside their hearts and needed a second to realize they were drenched. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. Then applause broke out. Not loud, not rushed, but rising like waves. One person stood, then another. And then the whole auditorium was on their feet clapping, as if to thank something pure that had just drifted by. Gracie stood still, clutching the hem of her dress, her eyes shimmering. There were no tears, but it was clear to everyone she had been seen, not for how she looked, but for what she had to give. In the third row, Helen stood, not clapping, only placing a hand over her heart, eyes glistening and smiling. A mother, an old dream, a little girl, a humble voice, and a room for the first time, learning what it meant to be quiet from true emotion. As Gracie stepped down from the stage, her hands still trembling, she wasn't quite sure what had just happened. The applause still echoed somewhere behind her, like a dream not yet fully formed. In her mind, there was only one image, her mother. And as the lights spilled over the audience, she saw Helen still standing, hand over heart, eyes red, but smiling, as if she had just witnessed the most sacred moment of her life. Just as Gracie reached the last step off the stage, a woman in a white blouse with a name tag quickly approached. She was around her mother's age, with light brown hair, tied neatly, bright, sharp eyes that also radiated warmth. "You must be Gracie Whitman, right?" the woman asked, her voice soft as a breeze. Gracie nodded, not yet able to say anything, when the woman extended her hand with a smile. "I'm Vivian Blake, director of the city's youth choir. I didn't come here to scout talent. In fact, I was just a parent watching my daughter perform. But when you sang, I knew I couldn't leave without speaking to you." Gracie blinked, glancing at her mother for some kind of explanation. Helen stepped closer and gently took her daughter's hand. Vivian continued, "I'd like to invite you to come audition at the studio. There's a summer scholarship program at Emerson School of Music for gifted youth from rural communities. Only 2 students are chosen each year. I can't promise anything, but your voice, it's unlike anything I've ever heard." Gracie didn't know what to say. She just looked at her mother. Helen looked at Vivian, then turned to her daughter and nodded gently. "Go ahead, sweetheart. This might be your path." That Saturday morning, Gracie and her mother stepped into a professional recording studio for the first time in downtown Amarillo. Outside, the traffic hummed as usual, but once the studio door closed behind them, the whole world seemed to fall silent. The walls were lined with acoustic foam, and soft yellow lighting reflected gently off the deep-colored panels. Gracie wore a plain white shirt and a pair of jeans her mother had patched up the night before. No makeup, no fancy dress. Just herself, a simple girl, and the worn notebook she always carried. Leo, the sound engineer, was in his 50s with graying hair and sat behind a large glass window, adjusting the microphones. He looked at Gracie and then spoke to Vivian through the intercom. "This is the girl." Vivian nodded. "Just let her sing, Leo. Trust me." Gracie stepped into the booth. The microphone was a little high. Leo lowered it to her height. Vivian followed her in and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You can sing Scarboro Fair again or any song you like. No pressure. Just think of it as a little adventure." Gracie looked through the glass at her mother, who sat watching her every move with tender eyes. She smiled, then said, "I'll sing Mom's song. No backing track, just my voice." And then, once more, that voice rose within the quiet space, each note echoing, as if weaving a story from the most raw and honest things, longing, sleepless nights, and unspoken dreams. When Gracie finished, no one said a word. Leo leaned back in his chair, silent for a long moment before speaking. "You've never had vocal training, have you?" "No." "I haven't," Gracie replied softly. "And yet you stay in rhythm. You know when to breathe. You convey emotion. All of it comes naturally. Not perfect, but real. And that's enough to move people." Vivian stepped in and gently took Gracie's hand. "You know the song you chose has been around for hundreds of years. But every time you sing it, it feels new again. Maybe it's because you're not just singing with your voice, but with your heart." That afternoon, Vivian sent Gracie's recording to the admissions board of the Emerson School of Music, where she served as an honorary advisor. With only a week left before the deadline, she added a single note. "If you're looking for a voice the world hasn't heard yet, but absolutely deserves to listen to this recording." 3 weeks later, as summer sunlight blanketed the roof of their trailer, Gracie and her mother received a letter printed on thick, pale blue paper, embossed with a lyre-shaped logo. Helen was standing at the sink, her hands wet with soapy water, when Gracie brought the letter over. She wiped her hands on her apron and carefully opened the envelope, as if touching something sacred. A letter from Austin. Gracie set her eyes shining like stars. Helen read each line slowly. "Dear Gracie Whitman, we were deeply moved by your recording. With unanimous support from the selection board, Emerson School of Music is honored to invite you to our summer scholarship program for young talents from rural areas." Below that, printed in bold, "All tuition, travel expenses, and room and board will be fully covered." Helen burst into tears. She collapsed into a chair, unable to hold herself steady. Gracie stood frozen, the letter trembling in her hands. "Mom, I really got in." For the first time in her life, Gracie Whitman didn't feel like the girl sitting in the back row. No longer the last name on a list followed by laughter. She was someone chosen for who she truly was. June in Austin was hot and dazzling. Roads stretched out beneath the shade of ancient oak trees, and the wind blew through the red-tiled roofs of Emerson School of Music, like a breeze brushing through the pages of an old book. The school stood on a small hill, A red brick building with frosted glass windows, like a vintage postcard come to life. For many of the students, it was just a prestigious summer camp. But for Gracie, it was an entirely different world, beautiful, overwhelming, and terrifying. Her only luggage was an old brown suitcase her mother had given her. Inside were a few changes of clothes, a pair of worn canvas shoes, and the same weathered notebook she always carried like a talisman. Gracie walked slowly through the gates, surrounded by girls in floral dresses, shiny shoes, and embroidered backpacks bearing their names. She overheard stories about Broadway shows, international stages, and famous vocal coaches. Gracie had only ever sung with her mother. She couldn't read sheet music, had never learned tempo harmony or vocal placement, and certainly had never performed in front of children trained professionally since the age of 5. The orientation took place in a domed auditorium with a gleaming grand piano under crystal chandeliers. Vivian Blake, the woman who had brought Gracie here, was the opening speaker. "Here at Emerson, we're not looking for perfection," she said. "We're looking for souls who can tell stories through music. Remember, sometimes the simplest voice is the one that stays with you the longest." But those words didn't stop Gracie from feeling out of place when she entered her first class, vocal anatomy. On the desk were diagrams of the chest cavity, larynx, diaphragm. The teacher spoke of vocal placement, resonance, and soprano range. Gracie sat still, her mind spinning. A girl turned to her and asked, "Are you a soprano or a mezzo?" Gracie hesitated. I'm not sure. You've never had training." The look that followed pierced through every patched layer of her clothes. "I just sing with my mom." There was nothing more to say. The glances, the slight frowns, said it all. A girl named Eliza, from the Boston Arts Academy, whispered to her friend, "They must have mixed up her file this year." The days that followed weren't easy. In choir class, Gracie couldn't keep up with the sheet music. In vocal technique, she often missed the beat. Sometimes nerves made her forget the lyrics halfway through, and the old memories of mocking laughter from her former school returned like wounds that had never truly healed. One night, Gracie sat alone on a wooden bench outside the dormitory hallway. No one talked to her. No one knew that she felt like a stranger in a grand house to which she had never been invited. The sky was dark. The yellow path lights glowed faintly, like hope slowly fading. Vivian arrived carrying 2 cups of peppermint tea. She didn't ask anything, just sat beside her, quiet as an old friend. Eventually, Gracie whispered, "I don't think I belong here." Vivian asked gently, "Why do you think that I don't know any technique? I come from a place nobody's heard of. I'm just too different." Vivian placed her hands around the warm cup, her gaze distant. "I was once a small-town girl, too. I came to the conservatory with an old guitar mispronounced. Everything didn't know a single note. People laughed at my voice. But one professor told me technique can be learned. But emotion, that's a rare gift. And you bring that with you. Don't forget it." Gracie didn't reply. But something inside her quietly shifted. A little light, even the smallest one, is enough to lead the way in the dark. The final week of the summer program arrived faster than Gracie had expected. In that brief time, she hadn't become the best, nor had she suddenly mastered complex techniques. But each day, she had taken one more step forward. The closing performance was held at Willow Hall, a grand, old wooden auditorium that seated over 500 people. Round chandeliers hung high above, casting warm light on the stage like layers of gentle sunshine. The seats were polished, and the programs were printed on thick paper, listing each student's name and their chosen song. That morning, a light rain fell over Austin. Outside the school gate, colorful umbrellas lined up in a long row. Guests included parents, teachers, musicians, and even a few local journalists. Among the crowd was a woman wearing a worn, cream-colored coat, holding a small box of pastries, and a handkerchief embroidered with the name Gracie in pink thread. It was Helen. She had taken the overnight bus from Brookdale to Austin, bringing nothing but pride and unconditional love. She chose to sit in the fourth row just beneath a side spotlight where she knew her daughter would be able to see her clearly. Backstage, Gracie wore a pale sky blue dress. It wasn't from a fancy store, but rather a creation stitched together by one of the teachers from two old shirts, a gift her whole class had pitched in to give her. Her hair was neatly tied back, and around her neck hung a sun-shaped pendant, the only birthday gift her mother had ever bought her. Other students chose Broadway numbers or complex symphonic pieces. Eliza, the girl from Boston, selected an Italian aria sparkling in her sequin dress. From the audience, polite rhythmic applause followed each act, accompanied by growing anticipation for the next. When the host stepped on stage, he spoke slowly, and now a voice from Brookdale, Texas. She will perform a classic folk song. Please welcome Gracie Whitman with You Are My Sunshine. A murmur passed through the crowd. Some tilted their heads. A folk song. In the middle of this formal concert, Gracie walked out holding the sheet of lyrics, her legs slightly trembling. The lights obscured the faces in the crowd. All she could see was a blur of seats and dim glows. But in her heart, one image was clear: her mother was out there. And that was enough. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Gracie's voice wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic nor filled with intricate embellishments. But it was achingly real. Every word seemed woven from nights without electricity, from dinners of stale bread, from the warmth of her mother's arms in the rain, when she softly sang, You make me happy when skies are gray. In the auditorium, a mother squeezed her child's hand. An elderly father lowered his head with a sigh. A student covered her mouth. Clara Jensen, a member of the Arts Board, sat motionless, her eyes glistening as she listened to the final line, Please don't take my sunshine away. And in that moment, Helen stood up. She didn't clap. She simply stood, one hand over her heart, looking at her daughter, as if to say to the whole world, That is my child. And I just heard the voice of my life in hers. 1 second, then 2, and then applause erupted like waves. At first scattered, then roaring. People rose to their feet one by one, then the entire hall. There were sobs. There were hastily wiped tears. And in the eye of that emotional storm, Gracie bowed, no longer trembling. She had been heard, not for her technique, but for being fully, truly herself. The next morning, in a small diner near the school, Gracie and her mother had breakfast, using the last of their savings. Helen sipped her coffee just as Vivian Blake entered carrying a thick envelope. Congratulations, she said, placing the envelope on the table. The board met late last night. They've decided to offer Gracie a full scholarship, no retesting required. The official program begins this fall. Helen went silent. She gently set down her fork, her eyes brimming with tears. Gracie asked, her voice tight, Can I bring my mom with me? Vivian smiled. If your mother is the reason you sing the way you do, then this school should thank her first. Years later, when Gracie had become a celebrated singer-songwriter, during a televised interview, the host asked, What was the moment that changed your life forever? Gracie didn't hesitate. It was when my mother stood up in the crowd. When no one else knew who I was. She already did, and for me that was enough. And so the story of Gracie Whitman comes to a close, from a little girl, dismissed because of her humble beginnings, to the moment she moved an entire auditorium to its feet. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep sharing powerful stories of perseverance, motherly love, and dreams reborn. We'll see you again on the next journey.